Squawk Box. Joining us now is National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. I mentioned you earlier. I don't know if your ears were burning. Kevin, saw you yesterday in the room, shall we say, with the rest of the cabinet. What was the general? Just describe what you think went on yesterday. Depends on where you're, obviously, where you're sitting politically. But for you, what was your takeaway?
First of all, I got to say that the spirits were really high, and that might be very common in cabinet meetings at the beginning, but I've never seen a meeting with people just being so glad to see each other. Everybody knew each other from before, and then the cabinet secretaries went through one by one. And you know what I was actually thinking? I almost said it, Joe, is that, you know, the director of the National Economic Council is not the chairman of the National Economic Council. The chairman is the president. My job is to make sure that the cabinet secretaries are adhering to the president's wishes. And I'm looking at all these competent people, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe I don't have to work as hard as I thought. These guys really know what they're doing.
What do you think the final big, beautiful bill looks like? And will it, the piece in the Journal about, you know, Republicans are going to run away from Medicaid reform when it's just ballooned in recent years, far and wide above what it was ever intended to be, and now actually is an entitlement for able-bodied men and women. That's not what it was designed to be. Are you afraid to actually talk about Medicaid reform?
We're not afraid to talk about anything. And the thing that was sort of another thing that happened, Joe, yesterday was that we had our first big meeting of the White House, and the Speaker of the House and the Majority Leader and the Chairman of the Finance Committee and Chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And we started to put together a roadmap for what the next stage of reconciliation and then ultimately the big tax bill is going to look like. And so there was a lot of interesting conversation between the two. It was very collegial. I think some members of the House wanted to talk about those matters. I think that waste, fraud, abuse will be on the table for everything. And I think that there's probably that in every single program. But the readout from the meeting that I had was that it was incredible also how well the Senate and the House people were working together. There were a lot of frank conversations about, I don't like this, I don't like that. And we agreed that we're all going to work together and get a bill to the President's desk as soon as possible.
Finding waste in Medicaid is one thing. Actually deciding to cut Medicaid outlays is an entirely different thing. Is that on the table? Right now they're on track, Medicaid, to increase by $2.4 trillion through 2035. If you were to take off just under $1 trillion, $880 billion, it would still be rising 2% a year when Medicare and Social Security haven't really increased as a percentage of federal outlays since 2007, while Medicaid is soaring up 10%, up to 10% of federal outlays from 7%. Will that be on the table? Would the president let that happen, or is it too politically toxic?
President Trump has made it clear that he wants Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security to be safe for all people who deserve it. Now, if there's fraud anywhere in government, of course we're going to look at it. But he 100% is behind keeping all those programs safe for the people who need those programs.
Are you have you become a big tariff guy yet, Ken? I don't think you were before.
You know, the interesting thing is that we've got a deadline coming up where the president yesterday, markets might not have noticed, extended by saying that we're going to deal with Mexico and Canada presumably the same time we deal with everything else. The schedule is that there's a study coming out on the 1st of April, and then after that the president's going to decide what to do about tariff policy for all countries. And so I think that there are things that we can do when tariffs come in to make sure that the composite package is very, very much supply side. And so if you were to see, somebody were to say something to you like, hey, my country just took their income tax and cut it a lot and then got some of the revenue back with value-added tax, then, you know, economists would say, oh, that's going to increase growth. And then somehow there are people who think that if you do a tariff, that it's going to be the opposite. But if you look at the analysis that'll soon be coming out of the White House, we've got a whole bunch of studies on this, you'll see that President Trump has a super pro-growth agenda. It's very, very supply side. And if you look at one little bit and then make the worst assumptions, then maybe you can make it look bad. But if you look at the whole package, then we're looking for 3 to 4% growth for sure over the next 4 years.
Kevin, you can see the you can see the strategy that Democrats are employing for pushing back against this bill. It's that, and actually I saw a Congressman Gottheimer, who comes on the show all the time. He's running for governor. He, even in his ads for running for governor, tax cuts for billionaires while we gut Medicaid. I mean, that's bad messaging. It's bad if they, you know, I don't know whether it's going to work for Democrats, but certainly, do you think that Republicans are highlighting what it would mean to extend those tax cuts enough? I mean, if you don't extend them, it's a tax increase on 91% of Americans, and families that make $80,000 a year most affected by not extending them. But you don't say that. You're not saying that. You're allowing the Democrats to say that it's tax cuts for billionaires, corporations, and pulling the rug out under poor people for Medicaid.
Right. Look, Joe, you know that you and I talked about this the last time I was in the White House, that President Trump has an agenda that is going to help working class Americans. And one of the main things that we talked about back in 2017 when we were first introducing these tax cuts was that it was going to increase the typical family's income by $4,000. You and I said that on the show over and over. The president said it on the show over and over. And right before COVID, the actual response to these pro-growth policies was that wages went up by $6,000. And so we've got like ex-ante theory, ex-post data. And so people who are out there saying this is going to hurt average families are in partisan denial. It's an unpatriotic thing to say. If you're going to be a politician and have an opinion about policy, you should study it. You should look at the literature, go to the National Bureau of Economic Research, and see all the papers that have come out after the tax cuts and said, hey, these things work just the way the White House said. If you don't study and you come out and say foolish things like that person just did, then you're not serving the American people well.
Hey, Kevin, you've talked a lot about the debt and the deficit and trying to bring it down, of course, and that has been one of the efforts that we've talked about together probably for, I don't know, a decade, if not more.
20.
When you think about DOGE and what it can do to bring down the debt and deficit, one of the big questions that has come up in the past week and a half has been this concept that Elon and the president have suggested there's a possibility of sending out these dividend or refund checks to taxpayers. And I'm curious how you think about that relative to the larger goal of bringing down the debt, recognizing that if checks are sent out, we're effectively levering ourselves up again.
Right. Thanks for the question. One thing that you can see is that if you see it in the 10-year, that markets believe that we're going to be very, very successful reducing the deficit. That's the only explanation for the big move in reducing interest rates, which has saved American taxpayers already over the last month about $50 billion. Markets believe it because it's true. Because if you look at what DOGE is doing every day, they're identifying cuts that we really ought to cut. And what we're doing at the Council of Economic Advisors and the National Economic Council is we're going to quantify those things. We're going to put out reports that show you exactly where the money comes from. And those reports are going to be so convincing that people will accept that those cuts can happen during reconciliation. That's our challenge. It's not a hard challenge because DOGE is doing a heck of a lot of good work on that. But we also have the gold visas, I got to say. The gold visas, it's not just a small thing. There are 300,000 or so visas, green cards, that have been granted but not used. And if we start allowing those to be people to invest in America and buy into that, then there's an enormous amount of revenue from that too. And so we are really, really focused on getting a balanced budget.
Kevin, can I ask two detailed questions on that?
Yeah, sorry.
How do you know the 10 years the yield's not going down because there's a recession coming from some of these policies? That's what the left would say. Sorry, Andrew, but I had to. He said it's just obvious that it's because of cutting the deficit. It could be that there's growth concerns. Now you can. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, if you look at what's been happening with the data, we've got CEO confidence, skyrocketing. We got small business confidence skyrocketing. We have consumer sentiment going the other way. But like the Michigan survey, don't forget that's a lot of angry Democrats from Michigan that are sorry that President Trump's in the White House saying, hey, we're really
Kevin,
depressed.
I would also say in Michigan,
look at all the data. There's no way that the data say there's a recession
but in Michigan, Kevin, and I'm curious what you think. We heard from the CEO of Ford just 2 weeks ago saying that they are effectively hoarding parts and supplies going back and forth between the border of the U.S. and Mexico, try to get those supplies in ahead of any tariffs, and the uncertainty of all of that has created a real complication for those automakers. But I have two questions for you, and I want to get an answer. On the DOGE refund check, if President Trump asked you, is that a good idea to send checks to Americans, the equivalent of stimulus checks, refund checks, dividend, whatever you want to call them, you would tell him yes, no, what?
Oh, sure. It's a great idea. And exactly what number or something is something that we negotiate with Congress. But remember, what happens is they appropriate money, and then we spend it on really silly things. And then we say, hey, we're really not going to spend it. And so then they can rescind the money. And they can take some of the money and they can use it to reduce the deficit. They can
Right.
take some of the money to put it in people's accounts, to return it as a tax cut. Those are all things that will be on the table. And I think the president makes it clear to all of us that when decisions like that are made, he wants to be in the middle of it.
But that would be a better idea than paying down the debt, given the conversations we've had?
The way the ratio happens between 0 and 1, like does it all go down to the debt? Do people get an immediate reward for all the good work that we're seeing? That's something that politicians will decide. But I think that having a dividend check is something that makes a great deal of sense because, why do we have to, not give people their money back? It's their money. If we
And then
save
Kevin,
people money, they
separately-
should get some.
Once
And can I also talk
you
about the
collect taxes,
macroeconomics of this?
you can never give it back. That's apparently what they think. Once you've taken money in tax, you can never, ever give it back to the people that
Joe,
own it.
do I have 30 seconds for one last point about this?
I don't know.
Everybody, I'll go fast. The thing is, everybody says it's inflationary if we mail these checks to these people. You saw that I got that question to the presser. Well, think about it. If the government spends the money, they spend $1 and you get whatever multiplier effect you think of that. If they don't spend the money and they say give it back to people, then if they spend $1, then it's a wash. If they save some of it, inflation goes down. And so the idea that it's inflationary is just, again, people should study their economics textbooks a little bit before they make partisan points.
I just wonder whether if you could get the debt down even further, that would help the 10-year and you create a bigger sort of long-term bump. Maybe, maybe not. Last question on the gold cards. The president said that he thought he could create $5 trillion, believed that there's a million people who could spend $5 million each to buy the gold card. Right now, you talked about 300,000 visas that were taken off or that are available. Right. Those are not at $5 million each. When you talk about the TAM, if you will, I was looking, it looks like there's maybe 1.5 million people around the world that would have disposable income of about $5 million even to do something like this. So what do you think the true possibility is here?
Yeah, the possibilities are really, really strong, especially as our economy gets stronger and stronger and the AI revolution makes the U.S. the place everybody wants to be. And the fact is that we've got a lot of ammo. We've got all these green cards that are authorized but not used. And so it's relatively easy to get this program going. I think that in the end, the market will decide what the price looks like. My guess is that it's going to be higher than $5 million. But certainly in the end, the market's going to decide. We're going to have a supply, and then we're going to figure out what those things are worth. But
so
I
you
think
don't think $5
we had
million
a weekend
is
of
the price?
estimate. No, we had a weekend of estimates, and we looked at the prices. You guys could go make a table for yourselves, or I can email it to you. We got a table of what other countries are doing, and given that we're the United States, the price is not unreasonable at all.
Oh, I don't suggest it's unreasonable. The question is there's going to be some people who get into the visa program for free, and we're trying to create a path for them. And so the question is how we're going to...
We want a path for them too, yeah.
Price this in the future, exactly. Okay, Kevin, thank you. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
guys.
Squawk Box coming right back. A lot more to talk about. Come on back.